Can you believe we put a man on the moon? Or did we? Let's enter the Buzzsaw.
Central Intelligence Agency.
It was described by witnesses as...
Bart Sibrel is a documentary filmmaker, most known for his film A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, which he produced and put out a few years ago, and has created quite a stir amongst, I would say, conspiracy aficionados who would argue whether or not we actually did send a man to the moon, or whether we did send someone to the moon and just created a fake video of the moon landing thereafter. We'll be discussing these topics and others. Bart also currently posts on the Sleuth Journal. He has Conspiracy Corner on that magazine. So we'll be talking with him now about these theories about the moon landings. Bart, thank you for joining us.
No problem, Sean. How's it going?
Very good, very good. So I saw your documentary quite a few years ago. When was it released again?
2001.
2001.
Like
oh, I see. Exactly, in accordance with Kubrick's film. And that's perhaps, we'll get to that question later. Let's start with the first question being, what led you to start to question the moon landings in general?
Well, my father was in the Air Force, so I grew up around aviation. And when they allegedly walked on the moon in 1969, I was 4.5 years old. I was asleep in bed. And my father, being an officer, he got a VIP package of 9x12 color pictures of the Apollo 11 mission. And I had about 15 and 20 of these on my bedroom wall for about 10 years. Then at the age of 14, I saw a news magazine program on with William Casey. He was a former NASA contractor during the Apollo program. He was one of the few people who saw the entire picture. Part of the way they keep classified information a secret is they departmentalize it, but he had to proof all of these memos between the departments, and therefore he was one of the few people who saw the whole picture. He alleged that they did not go to the moon in 1969 because it was impossible, and because Kennedy had set a goal that he could not achieve, and rather than admitting the United States had bitten off more than they could chew, they bluffed like a good poker player who had a bad hand to convince the Soviet Union that we had good strategic capability during the height of the Cold War. It was also a very good pep rally during the Vietnam War. Tricky Dick Nixon was president, and he said that the Vietnam War protests were the #1 cause subverting America, not, foreign enemies. He considered domestic citizens to be enemies of the country. So this was something to cheer about. I think, whoever did 9/11, whether it was really Muslim terrorists or domestic people, there's still 3,000 people dead. Whoever killed JFK, he's still dead. However, the moon landing conspiracy is the only positive conspiracy, and it's really hard to get people to give that up. It's like telling somebody your favorite team who won the Super Bowl, they cheated in order to win. They're not interested in hearing it. I first heard about this at age 14 and caught me as an open-minded individual. So after the program where I saw William Casey on, I went to my bedroom wall, looked at the pictures, and kind of like my eyes were wide shut the whole time, I started seeing things that he was talking about. That planted a seed in my mind. I was really pondering it in the back of my mind for about 10 years. At age 24, I'd become a filmmaker, and one day I was editing videos for the man who had actually produced the program I had seen 10 years earlier as a 14-year-old. And I said, well, do you remember the guy in your TV program who said we didn't go to the moon? He says, no, but call the San Francisco office. I called about 3 days before they threw away all 10-year-old files, tracked him down, and he suggested that I make a moon film about it, about how they didn't go to the moon. I try to take people at their word. Believe it or not, I'm really not a conspiracy theorist. I'm just looking for the truth. And I considered it a possibility that indeed the moon landings were fraudulent. At first, I turned down the project, figuring, if they really didn't go, and me being kind of a relentless personality who likes puzzles, it could be dangerous looking into it. So I originally turned down the project. Then, after about 5 years went by, I realized, well, everyone's going to die anyway. And if they didn't go to the moon, this is a really significant event in human history. I mean, think about it, Sean. Let's say on one hand, they could go to the moon. They could plant a flag on this lifeless rock with 1960s technology, even though they can't repeat it today. Or the other possibility is they couldn't do it, they lied about it, they murdered people to keep it a secret, they embezzled billions of dollars. So what we have here, if the moon landings are indeed fake, and I know for a fact that they are, that is actually more significant of an event historically than if they had actually gone. So what we have is one of the greatest events in human history, which is the faking of the moon landing because of a flaw in our character as a human race, and this great truth is being withheld from mankind. So, I wish it were a theory. 3.5 years into this 5-year project, if a funny thing happened on the way to the moon, I still gave them the benefit of the doubt. But I said, there's at least a 1 out of 4 chance that they didn't go. 3.5 years into it, I pop in this tape that had never before been seen. It says at the beginning of it, "Do not show to the public," and it's the only unedited reel that I had at that point received from NASA. Everything was pre-washed, pre-assembled for the news media. This was the same shot for an hour of them allegedly showing the Earth floating in space, and you'll see from the film it's a completely contrived 1-foot model of the Earth, proving that they were on the rocket, but they never left Earth orbit. They faked everything beyond that. And these people who say, well, maybe they went to the moon to commune with aliens, and that's why these pictures are fake. The fact is, if you really could go to the moon, you would go, and you wouldn't fake any of it for fear it would be exposed. So NASA or the government or whoever it is, they don't care why you believe that the United States has a capability to go to the moon, as long as you do. If you believe it has something to do with UFOs or aliens or whatever, they don't care, as long as you believe that the missions are real.
Only have one window that has a view of the Earth, and it's filled up with a TV camera.
If the window was completely filled up with a TV camera, as he stated, then an astronaut's arm would not be able to get between the camera and the window, as it obviously does here in this outtake.
South America becomes invisible just off beyond the Terminator or inside the shadow.
You can also notice how the astronaut operating the camera reacted to the mistake by attempting to pan away from it.
Blue cast, see white bands of major cloud formations across the Earth, and you see...
This is a segment that they believed wasn't even being recorded, much less suitable for broadcast, for the lens was being zoomed out and the scene was being changed to that of an interior of the astronauts at work, and apparently the stop button popped back up on the recorder without notice. Here is the diffused work light that they used to see camera controls, but not throw light onto the spacecraft's wall. Here they remove part of the crescent insert. Finally, the iris is opened up and you can see the real location of the camera and the very bright and near Earth out the window. Here is the slate for the 19th of July, and the same shot of trickery on the 19th of July, and then the 20th, and the same misleading shot on the 20th. Later that evening, they were said to be walking on the moon. How can this be when they were in Earth orbit only 9 hours earlier, and the moon is some 3 days' journey away?
I know that one of the main evidence that people allege as why it's impossible to go to the moon, they say the Van Allen radiation belt would be the radiation presented by passing through that belt would be too powerful, even though astrophysicists and others have dismissed that notion and that theory. Is that what your main hypothesis rests upon, that it's impossible to pass it?
Well, it's not a hypothesis. It's a fact they didn't go. You can see from the movie, we have unedited footage of Neil Armstrong on camera faking being halfway to the moon. Prior to that, it was a theory. Now it's not. Now there's a number of reasons why they couldn't go. First of all, you have to understand that no great accomplishment of this kind has ever been done, ever, on the first attempt. The first time the Wright brothers tried to go up, they didn't go up. It was on their 20th, 30th, who knows how many attempts. The first time Mount Everest tried to be climbed, you think they made it? No, they died. The first time they tried to go to the South Pole, they died. When Edison tried to invent the light bulb, you think he got it the first time? It was over 1,000 times before he got it right. To say that they went to the moon with 1960s technology on the very first attempt is illogical. Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic in 1927. It wouldn't be 50 years before any nation on Earth again flew an airplane over the Atlantic. I mean, when Columbus went to the New World, it was within a year or two that everyone went to the New World. Lewis and Clark went west within a half a year. Everyone went west. And we're to believe that they can go to the moon so easily with 1960s technology, and it cannot be repeated for 50 years. It defies logic. The problem is you're trying to take candy away from a baby. You're trying to tell someone who believes in Santa Claus that it's not real. It's the only conspiracy I know of that gives people a good feeling. It's a good conspiracy. People do not want to give that up. Now, in regard to the radiation, I can tell you this. In December of last year, they sent up a rocket called the Orion Project. It goes up 3,600 miles, makes a U-turn, and comes back. Well, when you go to the store and you take a U-turn and come back, your destination is the store. So when they go up 3,600 miles and U-turn, their destination is 3,600 miles. So what is at 3,600 miles? The Van Allen radiation belt. Most people don't know this, but every manned flight in human history was well below this radiation that starts at about 1,000 miles up and extends about 25,000 miles beyond that. The only time a human is said to have gone through the radiation is to the moon and back. Well, NASA produced, and you can show it, this great promotional video about Orion where Kelly Smith, a 20-ish engineer from the project, says that they are going up to test this dangerous radiation. And then he says, we must first solve these dangerous radiation problems before we send people through this region of space. Now, wait a minute. NASA just admitted that the technology does not yet exist to send people through the Van Allen radiation belt. So how is it that they did it 19 times nearly 50 years ago and not one astronaut got cancer, not even radiation sickness? They just admitted indirectly that they did not go to the moon. So I contacted NASA as a journalist and I said, hey, you had 2 Geiger counters, on board this unmanned Orion vehicle. Why not send me the information from the Geiger counters and tell me what were the radiation readings in this radiation? They said that information is classified. I said, oh, wait a minute. You send up probes that taxpayers funded to the sun, and the temperature of the sun, that's not a secret. And you send probes up to, Mars or Jupiter, and how much helium is in the atmosphere of Jupiter, that's not a secret. So why would the amount of radiation in the radiation belts, which are just a part of nature, be a secret? There's no reason for that unless it proves that the moon landings were fraudulent. And that's why that information is classified.
So one of the arguments that has been made, obviously, is that there was a moon landing, but it was then, because, again, as you mentioned before, because of some kind of alien presence or some kind of desire to keep secret that which was discovered, alien artifacts even on the moon, they basically had to stage it in order to recreate it for mainstream consumption. You don't buy that at all?
That makes no sense at all to me, because if you're really going to the moon and already people are doubting whether you really can and might be faking it, the last thing you would do would be faking any of it, because then people would say, hey, look, this picture's fake, which means the whole missions were fake. If you could go to the moon, you would show it, and you would also, if you were faking it, you would go as far as the point where you had to fake it. For example, let's say they could have landed on the moon, but for some reason they couldn't get out. The spacesuits didn't work. Well, they would have made it real up to landing and faked the walk. Let's say you could orbit the moon and not land. Then they would have done it real to orbiting the moon to get the real pictures and then faked landing and beyond. But what we have is them faking being halfway to the moon. Simply leaving Earth orbit, this tape shows them faking being halfway to the moon. In fact, you can hear the CIA on a third channel of audio. According to NASA, there's only Houston control and the astronauts on this channel. But there's clearly a third channel on there of a completely different EQ, crystal clear. And when NASA says, hey, the TV picture looks great, there's exactly 4 seconds of dead air. After the 4 seconds go by, we hear this third party say, talk. And then Neil Armstrong starts speaking. You see, he was supposed to be halfway to the moon, and light speed going out and coming back and the increased delay because of all the analog computer equipment, there would be at least a 4-second delay. He was really only 200 miles above the Earth, so he could hear them and respond immediately. But if he did that, it would give away that he was close to the Earth. That's why he had an earpiece in, and someone with a stopwatch, after NASA asked the question, counted off 4 seconds. And then they said, talk. Don't speak until 4 seconds go by. They were trying to create this radio delay. I mean, proof of the faking is right there. Then we see the shot of the Earth, you know, that's really the window.
Yeah, you talked about that, and that's in the documentary. And I think that's very clear that that mission was fake. But my point is, why are you discounting the hypothesis that, based upon your argument that 1960s technology, you're right, could not have gotten to the moon? Why are you not allowing the hypothesis that we have had greater orders of technology, the same way that people have seen UFOs for the last 60 plus years, if not historically, you can go back hundreds, if not thousands of years to other evidence of things, flying things in the sky. But the last 60 years of UFO sightings that go against all of our recorded technologies. Why would you discount the idea that there is a secret space program, that there is a secret order of black programs that might be far more advanced than the government would ever allow us to know? Do you understand? So why discount that idea that perhaps they have the potential or technology to go to the moon or to travel in space, but they would never admit that? So when they show us this sort of this trick and this dog and pony show of a tin can floating towards the moon, it is exactly meant to be a distraction, to be a show, and not really showing us the potential of where we could be.
Yeah, but the point is they did admit it. They said we had the capability to go to the moon. So it's not like they're trying to keep that capability a secret. They boasted. We had the capability to go to the moon. Kennedy, who's not a scientist, he's simply a visionary politician, he said after we went in space for 15 minutes from Florida to California, he said, hey, why don't we try to go to the moon, a completely another planet, by the end of the decade in only 8.5 years. Do you realize it took almost that long to build a 747 aircraft than going to another world? When it proved to be impossible, they faked it. If they could go to the moon, they would boast about it. And so they already said we could go. But the fact is they couldn't. The fact is that the missions were faked simply because they could not go. Now, I have no doubt that UFOs exist. The question is, where are they from? I believe they're from Earth. They are not from outer space. That's another lie they want us to believe. Proof of this is Ed Mitchell, who goes around claiming to be this somehow peace guru. In 1 second, which you can see in Astronauts Gone Wild, he says, I don't hit people. And then when my back is turned to him, he hits me from behind. He can't even go 5 seconds without lying. And so the man who says he walked on the moon when he did not also says UFOs are real. Well, what does that mean? It means they're not. Because he's a liar.
That's not exactly a logical conclusion, actually. But the point is that my point is that if you're saying UFOs are man-made, right? If they come from Earth, why the government has to admit they exist? You see. So my point is that there's many things that are kept secret from the mainstream, and I'm saying you can't simply discount what the government is doing beyond what they admit to us.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, and that's a very good point. The question is, if an alien technology existed, even though on average, if there is life out there, it would be approximately 300 million light years away. If an alien civilization had the technology to travel 300 million light years, and everything in Star Trek is true, then they would have the ability to be completely invisible. Meaning, if UFOs are being seen, it's because they want to be seen. If they have the technology to travel halfway across the universe, then they have the technology to never be seen. So the fact that they are seen means they want to be seen. Well, what does that mean? Why is a man who claimed he walked on the moon when he didn't also claiming, oh, UFOs are very real? when if they wanted to be invisible, you would never know about them. It's some deception that they're planning where they want people to believe in aliens from outer space. They want people to believe in UFOs. I was in a hotel a couple of years ago, bored flipping through HBO. 3 of the 10 movies on HBO are about aliens from outer space. Now, if 3 of the 10 movies are about what a great president Obama is, or 3 of the 10 movies are about what a terrible president he is, then I would say someone's trying to manipulate the way that we think. And they're constantly planting this UFO, alien from outer space, in our minds for us to believe in it. They could have faked Roswell for that whole purpose of getting us to believe in UFOs. That piece of paper sticking out of the guy's pocket that was, you zoomed in on years later. How do we know they didn't plan all of that? We have no idea. These people are the most intricate, as you very well know, chess players and wicked people who can think so many more moves in advance than we are. They can lead conspiracy theorists by the nose and get them to think what they want them to think.
So basically your argument and contention is that it would have been impossible to launch this, essentially a tin can, and land it upon the surface of a moon, which is 3 days' journey away. It's a very volatile atmosphere and object in its own right as far as the landing conditions can go. And so basically that itself was probably an impossible condition to achieve. But what was the motivation for this fake landing? Was it to sort of triumph American exceptionalism in the world and to obviously feed the industry around NASA and whatnot? So explain what the motivation for the success of the moon landing would have been if it was fake.
Well, it's one of the oldest reasons in the book, pride. Kennedy, who was a visionary, not a scientist, put the goal to go to the moon by the end of the 1960s, only a few days after the U.S. went in space with a man for the very first time, not even achieving a single orbit. They just went up for 15 minutes from Florida to California. Kennedy said, hey, let's put a man on the moon by the end of the decade. When that goal proved to be impossible, they just decided to bluff. Like in a game of poker, they would not eat humble pie and admit that we had bitten off more than we could chew. Plus, it was a great way for friends in the military-industrial complex to make money. It was a good distraction during the Vietnam War, give something, to feel good about for the average American citizen, to be prideful about. I mean, putting a man on the moon, if it were true, would be physically the single greatest accomplishment in mankind. Now that we know that it's not, it's probably the most gigantic, deplorable lie ever told by the country that claims to be a light on a hill, the rescuer of everybody, the promoter of democracy and truth and justice. It's terrible.
If this was then fake, do you believe the theory that it was Stanley Kubrick, who shot the moon landing?
I would say that's a very good theory for a number of reasons. Number one, the moon landings were fake. So they could either hire the media director at the Pentagon and get great security and amateur results, or they could hire the best filmmaker on the planet and get great results short term and worry about security later. That had to be the decision they had to have made. And what a coincidence. Stanley Kubrick was the greatest filmmaker on the planet at the time, shooting a film about going to the moon, 2001: A Space Odyssey. And it's a fact Von Braun and the flight director visited the closed sets of 2001: A Space Odyssey. And then I'm sure a lot of people have seen it in the movie The Shining. There's allegedly all these clues about him hinting at the moon landings being fake, the greatest of which is the little Danny Redrum boy who gets up from an outline of the pad there at Cape Canaveral with a shirt on that says Apollo 11, and he walks to a door with the room 237 on it, which was changed because that represented 237,000 miles away, average distance at that time, believed, from the Earth to the moon. There's no doubt, I believe, that he did it. Additionally, he stipulated in his contract of his very last film, interestingly named Eyes Wide Shut, because people can see a picture of a man on the moon and not see all the obvious reasons why the picture is fake. And he insisted contractually that that film open on a particular date. Even if he were to predecease the date, it would have to be carried out. That date was July 16th, 1999. The 30th anniversary of the moon missions is when he insisted that Eyes Wide Shut open. Yes, I believe that he did it. It's no proof of that, but that's a very, very good theory, and it's very likely true.
I'm curious, Capricorn 1 obviously was a film that came out before you started your investigations. What was your take on that? Do you think that came out of perhaps Hyams, the director's own instincts as to the moon landing, or some kind of rumor, or the government basically trying to put out a film that when people then came out to try to debunk it, people would say, oh, well, that was just a movie. That's where they got the idea from.
Well, interestingly, if you could find an original DVD or VHS of the film, it boasts on the back the only space film ever shot with NASA's full cooperation. Isn't that interesting? Here a film is about a fake space mission, and to prove that they didn't fake it, they say with open arms, come on in and we'll help you make the movie. It's pretty interesting. Additionally, it had all the top people of that time, the 1970s. You know, Hal Holbrook, Brenda Vaccaro, O.J. Simpson, Telly Savalas, Elliot Gould, and there's a film.
James Brolin, wasn't it?
James Brolin, and there was a film called Precious Images. It's about 6.5 minutes long. I think it won Best Short Film of like 1990 or something. And in this 6.5 minutes, they show all of the great feature films shot from the beginning of time up until that hour. And all of them are fictitious films, except right in the middle of it, there's a shot of men on the moon. Now, they didn't include any other documentaries in this commemoration of, you know, fake filmmaking, but they put it in there. It's because people in Hollywood were the first to pick up on that it was fake simply because of the lighting. I went to a wine tasting once, Sean, and this guy who was leading the class could drink a sip of wine and say, you know, wine is so many years old from this country, from this region of the country. And I'm like, give me a break. How can you tell that? But apparently you can if that's your forte. I can tell you, looking at a picture, was this shot with sunlight or was it shot with artificial light? You know, the sun is so bright on the moon, 20 times brighter than here on Earth because of no atmosphere. So the very last thing you're going to need is electrical lighting, plus all the, you know, setup and batteries and all that stuff. You have more sunlight than you know what to do with. And just, you know, your listeners and watchers, just go out on high noon, you know, with no clouds in the sky, and stand about 3 feet apart from your friend. You'll see that your shadows go in the same direction. No matter where you stand, no matter where you turn, the shadows will always be parallel with one another. But in several of these pictures, which you can see in A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, the shadows intersect, sometimes by as much as 90 degrees. That's completely impossible if they are in sunlight, which they were not. They were in electrical lighting. I can even tell you, and I'm sure you're familiar with them, although it might be just a hair before your time, they used to use umbrella lights. Maybe they don't really use them a lot anymore, but they would try to soften the light by bouncing a light into a reflective umbrella. And I was using them at the time I first started making this movie, but I go, that's an umbrella light. You can see fill light, even though the guy's in a complete dark shadow on the opposite side of the sun of the lunar module. I mean, they're filming the door, him coming out allegedly on the moon for the first time. The sun's on the opposite side. It should be pitch black. There's no, you know, additional lighting of any kind, allegedly, according to them. And yet he's, you know, you can see every detail on the astronaut's suit. It's simply not true. And then this National Geographic special is so amazing. You can see this on my YouTube channel. They go out to a desert at night, and right before that they say, well, we can't replicate, you know, the high temperature of sunlight. I'm like, you can't? And they go out to a desert at night, put up a big electrical light, and they have a guy, you know, dressed in an astronaut suit, and a guy stand behind or beside him, and they say, see, the, you know, the shadows intersect, therefore the moon landings must be real. Now wait a minute. Didn't they light the thing with electrical light and say that replicated the pictures that were taken on the moon? Doesn't that make it fake rather than real? Why didn't they just wait 12 hours, go to the same desert during the day, and photograph two people standing beside one another with the sun that was supposed to be on the moon? It's just the most amazing thing. They're actually proving that the moon landings were fake, all the while lying and telling you that they're real. They put an electrical light out, had two people stand beside one another and said, see, the shadows intersect, therefore the moon missions are real. But that's the very point that proves that they were fake, because it was lit with electrical light, which, depending on whether you're on the left-hand side of it or the right-hand side of it, it will cast shadows in different directions. I just can't believe this. The very logic and proof that proved the moon missions were fake, they turned it around and said, no, that's what proves it's real. And people bought that.
What do you take of what do you make of the video from later Apollo missions flying over the moon, or any of the even unmanned pictures of the moon? Are any of these real, or do you think they've all been doctored or all fake?
I would say, if I were them, I would make as much of it as real as possible. Before 1969, they sent unmanned probes to the moon. They sent unmanned probes to orbit the moon, and they show this huge model they have. It must be like at least 30 feet in diameter. And they pasted together all the satellite pictures from an unmanned lunar probe and pasted them around this circular moon that they have at NASA. You can see a picture of it. And they allegedly did this so that the astronauts could rehearse, the moon landing. Well, it's the very model that they used later to use rear projection to have their little fake model of the, lunar module coming up. And you being in the film business, you'll notice that when the lunar, orbit by itself, it's crystal clear. But when they then have the model, in front of the rear projection, you can tell it's like third generation faded. It's not crystal clear anymore.
But do you think most of the NASA photos that get released have been doctored or photoshopped?
Well, all the stuff on the moon obviously was shot in a TV studio, and sometimes.
Just in general, from the probes and whatnot, are we seeing actual footage? We've seen the actual footage of the dark side of the moon?
I would think so. I don't see any reason why they would have to lie about it. The term wicked, someone pointed out to my mind, comes from a candle. And if you look at a candle wick really closely, it's actually two threads woven together. And that's where the term wicked comes from. It comes from truth and lies being mingled together. They have, the fake moon pictures with some real moon pictures so that you'll buy it.
Indeed. Well, that's what makes it so curious and deceptive, as you are pointing out and investigating yourself. Beyond, obviously, you've talked about the notion of profiteering that went on with NASA, and how they swelled this budget, obviously, with everything from the rockets themselves and the research that went into it, even to the rovers costing far too much money for what it should have cost in comparison. But do you think that you still don't believe that there's a possibility that some of that money went into what's called black projects or black programs, whereby when people allege, for example, that there's underground facilities, that there's much higher orders of technology that you yourself talked about, the UFOs being man-made, government-made perhaps, that we're then talking about a breakaway civilization or a potentially far more technologically advanced civilization that is operating behind the auspices of our government than what has been admitted? You don't think that that's possible?
Oh, it's definitely possible, and probably is the way that it is. However, I think the greater concern isn't about how much their technology might be, 30 years ahead of the commercial industry, which, is impressive, but not all that impressive. What's more concern is that there are two governments. There's the, the face government, and then there's the, 10 or 12 people who are above the president telling the president what to do, telling Congress and the Senate what to do. I mean, the Congress and the Senate, they weren't, inquired to about whether or not we should fake the moon missions. They knew nothing about it. So what we have here is our elected officials are not the people running the government. That's of greater concern.
Absolutely.
I think Woodrow Wilson said so. I mean, he was president in the teens, in the early 20s. He said there is a shadow government. That's why he, started the Federal Reserve under pressure to do so, and he regretted it. Now, if the shadow government existed 100 years ago, think how much more entrenched it is today.
Yeah. Well, many politicians and others have referenced that idea of a cabal or a higher order of power. Where can people find more of your work?
Sure, you can go to Sibrel, Sibrel.com, and that'll have links to the YouTube channel. Just go down to the Moon Films and click on A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, and you'll see this footage that prior to me seeing it myself, I gave them the benefit of the doubt that the moon landings are real. And again, I was the biggest fan of the moon missions, and I had to admit that they were fake. It's just, do you seek the truth? If you had cancer, would you want your doctor to tell you the truth, or would you want him to lie to you and say everything's fine when it wasn't? Sometimes you have to cut off the limb to save the body. And unless we face these and other facts, that's what's going to happen. The body of America is going to die. Today being the anniversary of 9/11, I mean, it's so sad to think that someone would deliberately throw 3,000 lives of their countrymen away. I'm hoping that the truth about the moon landing will come out. It's probably, killed the fewest number of people of all conspiracies. However, it's the most symbolic. It's the most in-your-face, through-your-teeth lie. They gave these men congressional medals of honor. They held ticker tape parades for them. They put it right on TV that the moon missions are real when they weren't. And shortly before that, the conspiracy about the quiz show scandal came out in the late 1950s. And because of that, Congress issued a law that you cannot use television to deceive people. And the government broke their own laws. That needs to come out, and I'm hoping that if this truth comes out, then people will be open-minded to other truths as well.
Yeah. Well, Bart, thank you for your time. And people can also check out the Sleuth Journal, where your contribution on the Conspiracy Corner, where do they find that?
Yeah, just go to thesleuthjournal.com, and at the top, click on the Conspiracy Corner button.
Awesome. Thanks again for joining us.
Sure. Good to be here, Sean. Take care.
Thank you. Well, there you have it, folks. Some interesting insights, and honestly, a great documentary you have to watch for yourself to believe. A funny thing happened on the way to the moon. Whether or not you believe that it was entirely faked, whether or not you believe it was faked and there was an actual mission to the moon that was never publicized, it's important to understand that the government and the powers that we discussed do manipulate and constantly control the information and the dissemination of information to us. So it's imperative that we continue to question and seek truth, as Bart discussed. This is Sean Stone signing off. Can you believe we put a man on the moon? Or did we? Let's enter the Buzzsaw.
Central Intelligence Agency.
It was described by witnesses as
Bart Sibrel is a documentary filmmaker, most known for his film A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, which he produced and put out a few years ago, and has created quite a stir amongst, I would say, conspiracy aficionados who would argue whether or not we actually did send a man to the moon, or whether we did send someone to the moon and just created a fake video of the moon landing thereafter. We'll be discussing these topics and others. Bart also currently posts on the Sleuth Journal. He has Conspiracy Corner on that magazine. So we'll be talking with him now about these theories about the moon landings. Bart, thank you for joining us.
No problem, Sean. How's it going?
Very good, very good. So I saw your documentary quite a few years ago. When was it released again?
2001.
2001.
Like Nazi.
Oh, I see. Exactly, in accordance with Kubrick's film. And that's perhaps, we'll get to that question later. Let's start with the first question being, what led you to start to question the moon landings in general?
Well, my father was in the Air Force, so I grew up around aviation. And when they allegedly walked on the moon in 1969, I was 4.5 years old. I was asleep in bed. And my father, being an officer, he got a VIP package of 9x12 color pictures of the Apollo 11 mission. And I had about 15 and 20 of these on my bedroom wall for about 10 years. Then at the age of 14, I saw a news magazine program on with William Casey. He was a former NASA contractor during the Apollo program. He was one of the few people who saw the entire picture. Part of the way they keep classified information a secret is they departmentalize it, but he had to proof all of these memos between the departments, and therefore he was one of the few people who saw the whole picture. He alleged that they did not go to the moon, and about 5 years went by. I realized, well, everyone's going to die anyway, and if they didn't go to the moon, this is a really significant event in human history. I mean, think about it, Sean. Let's say on one hand they could go to the moon. They could plant a flag on this lifeless rock with 1960s technology, even though they can't repeat it today. Or the other possibility is they couldn't do it. They lied about it. They murdered people to keep it a secret. They embezzled billions of dollars. So what we have here, if the moon landings are indeed fake, and I know for a fact that they are, that is actually more significant of an event historically than if they had actually gone. So what we have is one of the greatest events in human history, which is the faking of the moon landing because of a flaw in our character as a human race, and this great truth is being withheld from mankind. So, I wish it were a theory. 3.5 years into this 5-year project, if a funny thing happened on the way to the moon, I still gave them the benefit of the doubt. But I said, there's at least a 1 out of 4 chance that they didn't go. 3.5 years into it, 1969, because it was impossible. And because Kennedy had set a goal that he could not achieve, and rather than admitting the United States had bitten off more than they could chew, they bluffed like a good poker player who had a bad hand to convince the Soviet Union that we had good strategic capability during the height of the Cold War. It was also a very good pep rally during the Vietnam War. Tricky Dick Nixon was president, and he said that the Vietnam War protests were the #1 cause subverting America, not foreign enemies. He considered domestic citizens to be enemies of the country. So this was something to cheer about. I think, whoever did 9/11, whether it was really Muslim terrorists or domestic people, there's still 3,000 people dead. Whoever killed JFK, he's still dead. However, the moon landing conspiracy is the only positive conspiracy, and it's really hard to get people to give that up. It's like telling somebody your favorite team who won the Super Bowl, they cheated in order to win. They're not interested in hearing it. I first heard about this at age 14 and caught me as an open-minded individual. So after the program where I saw William Casing on, I went to my bedroom wall, looked at the pictures, and kind of like my eyes were wide shut the whole time, I started seeing things that he was talking about. That planted a seed in my mind. I was really pondering it in the back of my mind for about 10 years. At age 24, I'd become a filmmaker, and one day I was editing videos for the man who had actually produced the program I had seen 10 years earlier as a 14-year-old. And I said, well, do you remember the guy in your TV program who said we didn't go to the moon? He says, no, but call the San Francisco office. I called about 3 days before they threw away all 10-year-old files, tracked him down, and he suggested that I make a moon film about it, about how they didn't go to the moon. I try to take people at their word. Believe it or not, I'm really not a conspiracy theorist. I'm just looking for the truth. And I considered it a possibility that indeed the moon landings were fraudulent. At first, I turned down the project, figuring, if they really didn't go, and me being kind of a relentless personality who likes puzzles, it could be dangerous looking into it. So I originally turned down the project. Then, after